On this episode of Pipeline Things, it is action-packed. We get into taxes, Star Wars, API 1163, and medicine in the United States. It's all over the map. I get a new guest co-host, and my old guest co-host is remote for the first time ever. You definitely don't want to miss this episode on 1163. All right, welcome to this edition of Pipeline Things. If you're watching the YouTube, you'll probably see some funny stuff. If you're not, some of this might not make sense, but I apologize. Here, filming at Rex in 2026, alone, I might add, I am on a search for a new host, and lo and behold, one has been found. Bam! Welcome! I will be co-hosting this podcast with Jason Skow, who will also serve as the guest. And the person who will be introduced is my former co-host for this episode, Mr. Christopher De Leon. So, Jason, before I get into the episode.
Yes, sir.
It's tax season in the United States. Is it tax season in Canada?
It is tax season. Yeah.
Okay. We're not going political, don't worry. Tax season in the United States, the tax code is something like 15,000 pages long or something in the United States.
Could be.
It is written by lawyers. For lawyers, for the express purpose, I believe, of keeping accountants in working conditions.
And secondary purpose to get your money.
Yes. They could have gotten the money easier and with less pages, though. I want you to know that.
They could, yeah.
I was told by somebody that the tax code is linguistically written in a way to be complicated and difficult to understand, such that the average individual struggles to make their way through it. And today,
you want me to confirm?
No, I mean, unless you conform to the U.S. tax code, which I don't know if you do.
The Canadian tax code is just as crazy. And you know what I heard that in
you know what it is? They wrote it in the United States and went north and wrote yours.
It could be. In Singapore, apparently you get like one page from the government. Says this is everything we know so far. Is there anything you got to fill in? And it takes like less than an afternoon for everybody to do.
I bet you they don't have 15, however many thousands of accountants.
I think it's written to just make it quick and easy. Like, ours is written to be complex.
Amen. Well, it's going to actually sound a little bit like today's episode because
that's as much as I know about taxes.
We're not talking about taxes on Pipeline Things. We are talking about API Standard 1163. And as I welcome my host back into the screen, Christopher, Sarah will now bring you in. Christopher is still my host. For those of you who are out there, don't worry. We are still together. We are still life partners, but Chris cannot be with me at
But
Rex.
now we're together.
But now we are together. You're right.
For those of you that are interested, I am not intimidated at all. I'm very comfortable. So you guys enjoy yourselves, have a good time, and I don't mind being an observer to this party.
Okay, so if you are listening to this podcast, you need, and you have not listened to the PPIM episode with Tom Bumenick, I'm going to tell you right now, I believe you need to stop and go back and listen to that episode. This episode is very much almost a follow-up to that episode in many ways. And in order to introduce this episode, I'm going to go over some of the statistics from the Tom Bumenick episode. And I'm going to start from the bottom up. He had 100 case studies that they wanted to see if the ILI results could meet a level 2 API 1163 validation based on the field data that they had. Of those 100 results, what they found, I thought was quite shocking. Only about 5% had the data on hand to unequivocally meet an 1163 level 2 specification. About half of the assessments required additional analysis. Like, in other words, they needed additional data, and then it could have been said that they could have passed the level 2. But just based on what they had, they didn't have enough, right? About 1/3 of the studies, it said that additional NDE measurements were required to validate the inspections, or the inspections would have to be rejected. So there was this possibility that they could be, but they would have needed more NDE. And 15% outright did not have enough data to be met.
Does that add up to 100%, Rhett?
I don't know. I didn't. It's 15. We have to do it right. There's a bunch of bouts in there. Thanks for questioning it.
Close enough. That's close.
The shocking thing, I think, about his paper to me was how many could not adequately meet the requirements of a level 2. Now, that episode we probably received more feedback on than any episode we've ever done, and it was largely into two camps. People heard one of two stories when they listened to that episode. The first story people might have heard was, the ILI tools aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And I'm like, that is not the message. The other message that should have come out of it was, we are not doing enough due diligence and enough excavations and don't have the data on hand to properly justify the tools for the use cases that we're using them. So for instance, they say plus or minus 10% in their spec. We're just using plus or minus 10% rather than actually verifying that the tool performed to plus or minus 10% or 11% or 12% or 13%, and then using the appropriate number of validation. What's interesting is you guys follow up paper, which I thought we're going to be talking about today. For those of y'all who are listening, this is the PPIM 2026 paper by Jason Skow and Jed Ludlow. And the title of the paper, I'm trying to get to it on my screen right here, is Advances in API 1163 Level 3 ILI Validations. I really enjoyed listening to this paper in the plenary. And again, I would encourage you, if y'all have the opportunity, the audience, to read it. I thought both papers reached very similar conclusions. And I'm going to tell you what I think those are before I turn it over. And Jason, we dive into this, because you can agree or disagree with me.
So far, yeah, I'm going to disagree.
Great.
Mostly agree.
I want my old host back. Both papers.
Come on, Chris disagrees a lot. Trust me, I know.
This is true. Both papers took exception to the level 2 approach. Tom took exception to the level 2 and thought it was inadequate. In fact, he points to the fact that it's not right. It's counterintuitive that fewer digs benefit you in a level 2. The more digs you get, the more penalized you feel in a level 2. Both papers came to the conclusion that we should be digging more than we actually are. Like, we need to be supporting our ILI data with more excavations than what we're currently doing. And both of you proposed fixes for the level 2 method. Tom's fix was like, hey, we could actually assess the tools for larger tolerances. You guys took a different approach to the level 2 problem, didn't you?
Indeed, we did. All right.
This is where I stop talking and you tell me all the things I said wrong, and tell me a little bit about what was y'all's paper about.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, thanks for that, Rhett. So this paper is, we referenced Tom's paper. I mean, it's not a direct follow-on. We didn't do, kind of some of the work that he was recommending. I would say more complementary. Is that a big disagreement?
No, so I'm
not a follow-on, but a
complementary.
Rather than
this being, The Empire Strikes Back, this might be like Rogue One, but not, are you a Star Wars fan?
I did not watch Rogue One. Anything before 1984.
Dude, he's not looking for the Death Star's blueprints, bro. Like, that's not what he's trying to do. He's not trying to undermine anybody.
The point was the same universe.
If you say these aren't the droids you're talking about.
Nice try.
Okay, go.
Okay, well, I would say it's complementary for sure. And, Tom did a lot of work, exercising the level 2 and the level 3 and then showing what that means with real data sets. We were focused on the level 3 because, Jed and I and Ryan Stewart, who's also co-author on this, did a lot of the work that was the basis for it. We're looking at the level 3 and it makes, to me anyways, it makes more sense. It's more straightforward. And the key insight to this paper is that a lot of people will look at level 2 and level 3. I think, you may have referenced to that in the intro and say, well, these are quite different, or the level 3 takes more, it requires more data. And
that's the argument most people make. It's too much data, Jason.
Yeah, and also the other argument is, well, the bounds get wider. They're wider than the ILI vendor specification. And so is that a problem? Well, here's the thing that the focus of our paper. Our paper says that if you look at level 3 from a different perspective, you can get the same answer as you get from a level 2. You just have to understand what the level 2 is trying to do. Mm-hmm. You can get the same answer from a level 3 as you can from a level 2. But when you get different answers, it's because you're asking a different question. And the question is a little bit around what you were alluding to at the beginning, which is, what is the performance that we achieved? And how confident do I want to be in that performance?
So, Jason, is it fair to say, though, that in 1163, the reaffirmed 2008 version, we actually describe a level 3 validation as requiring substantial data and it being an exhaustive effort? And so I feel like that kind of created the stigma around level 3s are complex. They require a ton of data, which kind of sets a stage for you to bring this solution, which is, well, it's not that complex. And we could actually kind of do the same thing you want to do with the level 2, but through a level 3 method without having to describe it as requiring substantial amounts of data like was in the previous version of 1163.
Yeah. And, the answer that we give in this paper about that is the data requirement to be sure about something is the same in both cases. It's the interpretation of what you get with low data sets in a level 2 and high data sets in level 3 that people are thinking, well, those are two different things. But you can make them equal, and to be confident about the same conclusion, you need the same amount of data in both cases. It's just we're not used to using them that way.
It really just boils down to the way it was worded then, right? Because again, in a level 2, the way we define it specifically says for a level 2, it says we don't draw a definitive answer is how we kind of, I'm just saying that's what it says in the 2018 version. And then for level 3, it says it requires exhaustive data.
Right. And if you follow what we've done in the this paper, this PPIM paper, and you do the most optimistic result, you don't need much data either.
You're giving away the baby. You're giving away the baby. We're not there yet.
Okay.
You're delivering the baby too early.
Okay. You want to build this up? Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But I want to step back because you did something in the paper and you did something on stage that I liked. And you said it here, you alluded to it, but didn't define it, which is the level 2 and level 3 are answering different questions or asking different questions.
They're answering different questions that you have to ask to get those answers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you write text code? What is this? So
I just try to pay my taxes. That's as far as I get.
So explain, elaborate then. How do because you keep saying that if you do you need the same amount of work for them to tell you the same story. What fundamentally is a level 2 doing, and how is it different than what a level 3 is doing?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question, Rhett. Thank you for asking that question. I think this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, and these statistics are a little bit convoluted. If you've been thinking about it a long time, you wrap your head around it, you can see there's differences between them. But if you're just looking at it from a high level, that's where that misinterpretation, I think, comes from. A level 2 is based on this really old statistical test called null hypothesis significance test. And what we're doing with that test is we're assuming we have the vendor specification. We're going to assume that that's correct. Right out of the box, no data. That's where we start. And then we start to collect some data, and then we're going to see, does that data disagree with that spec? And if it does it disagree strongly so that we're 95% sure that it disagrees with that spec? And if it does, then we fail. But if it doesn't, then we say it passes, and then we just use the spec. So that's not a very high bar, because what you could do, for example, is you could say, I don't have that much data, therefore I'm not sure. Even if it disagrees, it doesn't disagree strongly enough, so now I cannot reject it, so therefore I end up using the vendor spec. But there's a good reason for this. This is a well-known statistical tool, and where it comes from is it comes from the idea that the vendor has done their job really well in coming up with a spec, that they've done lots of these flow loops, they've used realistic type features, they've done thousands of pull tests and so on, and then they come up with a spec. So then we're saying, well, they're the experts, and we expect to get the performance that they're claiming, and unless we get lots of evidence that says we didn't get that, we're just going to go with their spec. That's kind of where that comes from.
But
What
that's
you
an
can do
important
is
part.
very, very
We need to pause there, right? Yes, that's you use the key word there. That's very optimistic. And so the only plug I'll put
It
in
is
here
optimistic, yeah.
is
Yeah.
1163, at least for our US clients, it's incorporated by reference to requirement, and that standard has a qualification component to it. So I just wanted to make that plug in saying, guys, when we use a level 2, it's because we're optimistic about the efforts that were put in place to establish that spec. But then at the same time, we're required to make sure we understand how that spec was developed. Otherwise, that may need to push you towards kind of where you were going with this paper, whereas it's maybe we need to ask in a different question, which is what is the tool's performance?
This is like innocent until proven guilty, in a sense. I'm using criminal terms, right? Because we, in the United States,
Tax law, criminal law. What's this guy all about here?
We require a high bar to convict someone in the United States, right? It's innocent until proven guilty. In 1163 level 2 terms, if you disagree, just tell me and I'll restate it again. But in the level 2 terms, the spec is correct until proven incorrect.
Yeah, and then the question there is, well, how hard do you try to prove it?
Which that kind of makes sense, Chris. The reason, and again, maybe the audience is like, duh, Rhett, but for those of you who don't live 1163 and breathe it, like my 2 co-hosts, both of them here, you see how I called you a co-host this time?
Thank you.
I always found it kind of funny how the dig stuff works in the level 2, because anecdotally I observed what Tom and you just described, which is if you have fewer digs and only, I don't know, like 3 of them agree out of the 6, you're like, oh, it meets. And you're like, does it really? That doesn't make sense. But then you get more digs, it does feel punitive. But now I think I'm understanding why, because more digs work against you in that sense. And it's just, to me, it's coming together in my mind. So if a level 2 is innocent till proven guilty, what's a level 3?
We use the word pass there, and the reality is it's the intent wasn't for it to say does it pass or fail. The intent of the level 2 was to say, can I reject it? And so if the idea is it's that if we put a compliance hat on and just say, hey, I'm required to do a level 2 validation, what's the incentive of getting more data? Because then otherwise I might have to reject it. And that's kind of where you got to be asking the right question, which again, I go back to, we as an industry, as a consistent, have worded it this way, right? To say, as a level 2, it's do I have enough evidence to reject it or not? And so we just got to be careful about saying, do I accept it? Or am I really, my posture just, do I have enough evidence to reject it?
Well, Rhett, you were referencing, something that you liked that I did on stage. And I'm not sure what that is, but I'm hoping what it is.
It wasn't the part where you danced. Just so we're clear, it was not the part where you danced, and it was not the opening joke.
Okay, good. I'm glad we cleared that up because I was worried. Okay, but there was, when I was talking about this at PPIM, the example that I gave for a level 2 was, and this is kind of along the theme of what we're talking about, if you take it out of context of pipelines and say, let's apply a level 2 to something else. So let's say, for example, you're helping somebody in your family. They've got a health issue. They're going to the doctor. They're going to get a treatment. And so you're helping them out, and you're quizzing the doctor, like asking them, well, is this treatment going to work? If their answer was, they said, we've tested this far and wide, and for 95% of people, this solves the problem. Okay, that's like a level 3. That's what that means. We've tested it 95% of the time it works. But what if the doctor's answer was, I have no reason to believe it doesn't work? If this is somebody you care about, you're thinking, okay, now wait a minute. Now I've got more questions. Like, how hard did you look? How many times did you study this? Because if you didn't study it at all, I'm not confident. I'm not going to let you give this to my, loved family member. So that's what a level 2 does. Now, if you had complete confidence that that system works, and the doctor said, well, I don't have any evidence that it doesn't work, but there's other people that somehow claimed it worked. I have no evidence it doesn't work. But there's a really strong system in place. That still might be good enough in some circumstances. But that's the difference between level 2 and level 3, if that makes sense.
It does. There's so many absolutely terrible
Tax,
but funny applications
legal,
I could make.
Now medicine. Okay, dude, how much more do we have to cover?
You have to understand, my whole family's medicine. My wife's a pharmacist. My brother's a doctor. My sister's a physical therapist. My mom's a nurse. I could go down this path, but somebody in my family and likely half of the audience would get angry if I did. So that analogy is fantastic though. In my mind, I was laughing about where I wanted to take that. So I like how you put it though. The level 3 actually tells you I'm 95% confident, right? So the distinguishing factor of the level 3 is it actually measures the performance of the tool.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, right?
And what evidence do we have? What can we say with the evidence we have? Not that there's another claim and then we're trying to gather evidence to say the claim's wrong.
But it's much harder. It's much harder to do. It requires much more information, right?
Not really, because if you look at now, this is also part of the papers. The question you're asking, if you get to the same question, you need the same amount of data to get to the same answer, roughly. Now, the statistical techniques are a little bit different. It's not the exact same answer, but it's very close. And if you read the paper, and this is the work that Jed did, he's got some nice plots in there to show the differences between the two approaches. They line up. They line up
up when you phrase it correctly, which was really, again, something else you and Jed did very well on stage.
And there's a second piece in here that I want to make sure is captured in this discussion about the paper. The other thing that we did is we included the idea that the field has error in it. Okay? Because when you have a unity plot, there's data scattered in that unity plot. Some of that error is because of the field, and some of it is because of the ILI. What we've done in the past is we've often attributed a lot of that to just the ILI, sometimes all of it. In fact, the default level 3 as it was originally written in the first IM 106 project for PRCI that I was a part of, was attributing all of it to the ILI in the level 3. And a lot of operators came back and said, well, that's not fair, because we know if we look at the field, we can't measure things exactly the way they are. If we compare them to destructive lab tests, they're not exactly right in the field. And in some cases, people make the argument that the field is on the same order of magnitude as the ILI. Maybe it's a little bit better in some cases. I think it depends a lot on the technique. It depends on a lot of the circumstances. Sometimes the technologist doing the work, their experience, etc., human factors, lots of things go into that. But if we take all of the error and just say it belongs to the ILI, well, that's giving the ILI a little bit of a hard time. So in the one case, we're doing a level 2, which is kind of easy on the vendor. But then on the other hand, if we're attributing all the error to the ILI, we're making it too hard on the vendor. So we're not kind of sitting in the middle here. We're not treating the ILI tool fairly in one sense, and we're kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt in the other sense. So why don't we meet in the middle?
So that's a good place to actually pause for a moment, because what I want to do, audience, we're going to come back. I'm going to have him describe the test case that they did, which was one data set. And then we're actually going to talk about the 4 questions they asked and the results that we got. This, for me, I think was my favorite part of the paper. So hang on, and we'll be right back with my co-host / guest / person of interest, Jason Skow. All right. We are continuing our conversation on API 1163 Level 2 and the PPIM paper with Jason Skow, my new co-host guest, and my old co-host, life partner, Christopher De Leon, who's with us virtually. When you were describing that whole Level 2 thing, I wanted to just keep going with a bad analogy, because it's so shocking. I felt like the Ewoks were coming on screen, and you're like, whoa, what? What is this? What is that thing? But that, when you were describing this whole null hypothesis.
Are you pro-Ewok or anti-Ewok?
I think when I was a kid, I thought the Ewoks were really fun, right? But when you go back and watch it in hindsight, you're like, what? Like, what just happened? Yeah. So, yeah. Did that analogy work for you? Probably not. Chris is probably not happy with that.
No, it's so good, because the Ewoks, you think of them as like being like furry and cute, but maybe not resourceful, but then surprisingly they are resourceful. So you kind of think of a level 2 like that, right? It's like, well, yeah. It's kind of simple, but I guess I can use it to get the regulators off my back. Hey, I did a level 2. It's kind of like
there's they're riding around a little jet thing. Okay, so Jason, if you don't mind, the case study that y'all presented in the paper, would you describe the details of it for the audience, please?
Sure. So we had one data set. So this is why, this is one of the reasons I say it's quite different than what Tom did. He had 100 data sets. We had one data set, and we treated it a bunch of different ways to show this equivalence between the level 2 and the level 3 if you ask the same question. So there's a table in there that, Rhett, I know you like. It's a table summarizing kind of some of the results that we got from this one data set, treating it 4 different ways. So which 4 ways do we treat it? One, we just looked at the total uncertainty.
Okay, and if you want to look this paper up, and Sarah might throw the graphic on the screen, she's referring to table 1, and you're referring to the conservative, what y'all titled the conservative estimate of total uncertainty.
Yeah, that's right. The conservative estimate of total uncertainty. The key there is it's the total uncertainty. This means that we're taking all the uncertainty,
field, everything.
Yeah, we're taking what we see in the Unity plot, and we're just saying all of that belongs to the ILI. That's why it's conservative.
Throwing it all on the ILI.
That's what we did. Yeah, and the total uncertainty. No, it's not fair. But this is the upper and lower bound. That's how we calculated it. We just said that's the total uncertainty.
And so when you did that, you did it with a 95% confidence interval. Do you need to explain that? Does that need explanation here?
Well, when we say that it's conservative, we are saying how conservative? Well, we picked the 95% confidence interval because that's very high. That means that if we repeat this experiment 100 times, 95 of those 100 times, we expect to get the same answer.
If you repeat this experiment with throwing all of the error on the ILI, this specific case study, 95%.
Or technically, the bounds that we calculate will contain the data 95% of the time.
Gotcha.
So that's what we're saying. So that's why it's conservative. So that was one case, just the total uncertainty. But then what we did is we said...
Wait up. You gotta let... You can't... You might be co-host, but Padawan...
I'm just an Ewok invading this podcast right now, so you just keep going. Keep going.
The answer y'all got for that, because I want the audience to hear it, is plus or minus 14.6%, meaning that the ILI's performance, according to that scenario, is plus or minus 14.6%, which is larger than plus or minus 10%, but as we stated, is unfair to the ILI tool for sure, correct?
And that's why we we labeled it as the total uncertainty.
Gotcha.
Trying to get away from the idea like this is not all just the ILI, but this is how it's calculated. You just attribute it to the y-axis. You calculate the upper and lower bounds using the standard tools.
Now, can I ask you a question? Why is there no level 2 method for that one? Right. So the other ones you have level 2 methods. Is that because there's no way to answer that same question in a level 2?
No. Yeah. Why is there no level 2?
Ask a question that the host can answer. That means we skip to the next one. That's what that means.
I think we could do it. Yeah. That's a good question. Okay.
PPIM paper next year. You have to come back.
I don't know.
Okay. So then the second case study, moving on, audience. So the first case study, plus or minus 14.6%. If you're familiar with the ILI technology and metal Austin specifically, you would expect plus or minus 10, right? So this is larger, but in an unfair, I'm going to say, judgment of the ILI tool or assessment of the ILI tool. The second case, which you called conservative estimate of ILI uncertainty. Explain, please.
Yeah, so now in this case, we're looking only at the error that we think is attributable to the ILI. Now, remember I said this is one data set, so we didn't explore sort of all the different field techniques and field errors that there could be. We gave a fairly favorable to the field performance for the field error, saying that the field error is quite a bit better than the ILI error. But we're still accounting for some error. So if you kind of draw one of those ovals around there, those football shapes, it's going to be quite narrow on the field side and quite tall on the ILI side. But still, we're saying that the field is accounting for some of this measurement error that we're seeing. And in that case, it's still conservative because we're still doing the 95% confidence.
So again, 95% of the time, if we run this scenario where we assume small field errors, which makes them, I'm going to say, closer to the gospel truth, if you will, and larger ILI errors, we came up with plus or minus 13.3% as the tolerance.
Yeah, it kind of drops 2% in this particular case. It drops about 2%. That'll depend on the data set you have, so that's not going to be like a standard rule, but it will drop. Directionally, we'll see that tighten up a little bit. In this case, it tightened up.
Gotcha. And which is still, again, I want to point out, larger than plus or minus 10%. And there's a reason I'll keep saying that. I'm gonna circle back on it at the end. So that's case 2, audience. If you're listening, again, just to recap, case 1, total uncertainty ascribed to the ILI tool, unfavorable. Case 2, we gave more favorable uncertainties to the field, but perhaps a realistic uncertainty to the ILI. And then in case 3, you called it best estimate of ILI uncertainty.
Yeah. Now, case 3, this is a different interpretation. Instead of saying 95% confident, we're saying 50% confident. So this is more like, what's the expected performance or what's the average performance? We're not looking at in 95% of the future cases that the bounds that we calculate would contain that uncertainty. We're saying just on average, what's the performance?
On average.
Yeah. On average, just what's the performance on
Do you know
which
average? Errors you used with case 3? Was it the field ones from case 2 or was it total?
The same field ones all the way down.
So case 2 and case 3 are nearly identical with the exception of all you did is change the confidence interval.
That's right.
Got you. And when you did that, you went down to 11.4%. Right now, I want to restate it. In layman's terms, that's an assessment, a fair and average assessment of the ILI tool's performance.
For this data set.
Got you. And it's plus or minus 11.4, which again is larger than plus or minus 10. The last case you called optimistic estimate of ILI uncertainty.
Yeah, and now this case is equivalent to the previous case in every regards, except we use a confidence level of 5%. 5% is not that confident. That means 95% of the time you're going to get something that is wider or larger than that. So that's why this is considered like sort of an optimistic view. Like, what's the best performance that we think we could achieve? Now, the reason we use this is because this is very close to what we used in IM 106A when we calculated the plausible spec. It's very close to that. And so those two become kind of comparable cases. So if you wanted to say, level 2 and level 3 are different, well, that's just because the way we're calculating is different. If you do it the way we've outlined in the paper, you get quite close answers. Now, this 5%, this very optimistic view of what the performance could be, there are some cases where you might want to use that, but you wouldn't want to use that in a case where you're doing, let's say, a risk assessment based on performance to say, well, the best possible performance we could have gotten is this calculated value. Let's use that everywhere else, or let's assume that that's good enough to do sentencings of features on the pipeline. I don't think that would be a good idea, but it shows you how to make the equivalence between the two. And it also shows what is this optimistic performance if you wanted to figure that out. I think a more realistic number is the 50th percentile, which is to say, on average, what do we think we're achieving?
So what I love about this table and what I loved about it at PPIM is the plus or minus, that final answer you got was plus or minus 9.85% audience for the optimistic estimate, which is marginally hair's breadth lower than the stated performance spec for the tools. What I love about it is that makes sense because from my perspective, you're very, very close to the specification under optimal conditions, which is usually, in my opinion, what the specs reflect for tools, whereas actual run conditions in many cases may not be optimal. Second thing is that the best estimate of ILI certainty, your which you said your 50th percent one, what I love about that is it's marginally higher than the 10%. And in the episode with Tom, one of the things he kept saying was 1163 currently doesn't allow you to do a level 2 to something that's slightly larger than this spec. And he's like, so plus or minus 10% doesn't work. It's like you dead end. But in reality, many operators would be fine if you told them, hey, it's not actually plus or minus 10%, but it's plus or minus 11.4%. Because in reality, that's probably not going to make a hair's worth of difference in anything that you're doing. But what I like is the confidence in that a plus or minus 11.4 is much greater than the null hypothesis level 2 that they're trying to prove up. So for me, this is actually amazingly consistent. It helps close the loop with what we were saying for me, again.
Well, let me stop you right there.
Go, stop. Here come the Ewoks. Coming back on.
Yeah, let me bring in my Ewok. Stop right there, sir. Just to add in, something more to the conversation about that is, obviously in this paper, Jed and I are suggesting let's use level 3 rather than level 2. And so here we've shown equivalence between the two. So if they're equivalent, why use one over the other? Well, let me put a couple more points forward on that. And you alluded to them earlier, Rhett, which is if you have fewer data points, you're kind of going in the wrong direction, or you can't reject something. So it kind of makes you feel like, oh, I passed, but what does that really mean? Of course, you can think it through what it means, but it's not straightforward. You reduce the data points, you can't reject, so then you default back. That is non-intuitive, that order, and it does not lend itself to good analysis. If you took the 50th percentile on the level 3 and you said, well, let's collect more data points, you actually get a better estimate of what the performance is going to be. That's what you expect it to be. So that's number one. The data operates intuitively the way you think it should for the level 3. So why not use the level 3? Level 2 is backwards. And then secondly, when you increase the confidence in a level 3, it works the way you think it would work, which is, let's say I'm 50% confidence. That's the average. Let's say I'm 95% confident. That means that I'm very confident because out of 100 cases, 95% of them should follow this performance. What if I'm 98%? Well, that's even more confident. It just makes sense. What happens with a level 2? It actually goes the other way.
Yeah.
Because if you say I want to be 95% confident, I have to be 95% confident that I can reject. Now, what if I want to be 99% confident I can reject? Now I got to be even more sure that I can reject, so I'm less likely to reject. So that's how the level 2 works. The level 2 is non-intuitive unless you're really familiar with it and working with it a lot. The level 3 makes more sense. And because you can make it equivalent to how we use the level 2, there isn't a lot of need to keep the level 2 around. Let's just use a level 3. Let's use whatever level of confidence we think makes sense for the job we're doing, recognizing there's different levels of confidence. They don't all have to be 95%. Some could be 50%. Some could be 5%. You want to say what's the most optimistic performance. But the level 3 works intuitively. And so that's what this paper is about, is trying to encourage people to look more at that level 3 and use it appropriately. The idea that it's more data, it's always wider. Well, it's wider if you're putting a higher demand and a higher criteria on it. But if you bring the criteria back, it's very similar.
So, Chris, why haven't you been demanding more people do level 3s?
Because I think there's a big question between no, this is real, because I'm still not sure if I personally have a position on who should be driving this boat. So on one hand, you have operators who have been inspecting a specific piggable segment or a system with multiple piggable segments, call it since the early 2000s. Let's just say that with a standard technology. But at the same time, you also have service providers that know their systems and that also have a one-to-many relationship where they could be gathering data based on essential variables. And so really, it's while both people should be working really hard to understand the actual performance of these ILI systems, and we want it to be collaborative, the reality is it's hard to really know who's the best person to push. right? If an operator is leveraging an ILI service provider because that provider does a good job of gathering data and they have a ILI system unity plot with their level 3, or should it really be the operators that are saying, hey, on every asset to understand if I can use the ILI data, I'm going to do a level 3. Back to what question are we asking? I'm not sure yet if it's fair to say which of those two questions is correct. What I would say is we've been pigging a long time, and I'm not shy about this, right? I think in this case, this paper shows that a specific ILI system, a service provider should be able to tell you what their tolerances are based on a tolerance interval for a level 3. So the first question I would say, and you're saying, why don't you press? I would say to all of our operators out there, before you award work this next time come around, do an experiment. Ask them for the level 3 assessments on the ILI systems that are being bid and see what you get.
The other thing I would add to that, Chris, really good points. We want to go into this eyes wide open. We don't want to ignore data. We don't want to ignore history. We don't want to ignore experience that we have. I think there's proper ways to bring that in. So far, what we've been talking about with this paper is just the data that's in front of us from digs or from other data that we get about that we can put on a unity plot. But some of the other ideas that you're talking about, we've got experience. We've used this technology stack in the past. We have SMEs. We've run this same tool on the same line, not this time, but we ran it last time. And then there's a sister line. It was constructed the same and has the same morphology of threats and so on. And, some people are saying, well, hey, what about all this experience? Am I not supposed to bring that into this analysis? Of course, it should be brought in. I think the level 2 is not quite the right way to bring it in, because if we say like we're going to be kind of ignoring this, but we can ignore it because this other thing is also there, that's not quite the right way. They can compensate for each other potentially. But what I would suggest in this case is we do something more like a level 3, and then we bring in the prior experience to beef that up. So rather than just look at the data we have on hand, we say, well, we got this data. And sometimes it's very slim data. You might run a tool and get very few data points, very few digs. You don't have very much data. Can you bring some of this other data in to supplement? I think the answer is yes. Do it responsibly. Do it judiciously. I think the answer is yes. But I think it's very hard to do that with a level 2. I think you can do that with a level 3. You can do that with a Bayesian analysis using priors and prior information. And, this is actually a paper I'm interested in collaborating with somebody on in the future, is how to do that with the priors, how to bring in that previous experience. So that's real. That's real, and we have to consider it. And I'm not suggesting in any way that, we should discard that or we should be hard-lined about this or that. I think we got to bring that information
Go,
in.
Chris.
I'll ask this simple question here. It's for the audience. In 1163, I told you we defined level 2 as indefinite answer, and we say level 3 is extensive validation. So I'll ask you this question. Can you do a level 3 using 6 data points?
Well, in the IM 106 paper, we recommend 10. So I would say 6 is probably too few to do it. Now, the reason for that is, you can still do the math. The reason for that is that there's something called small sample size uncertainty. And small sample size uncertainty means basically if you don't look too hard, there's a wide range of what reality could be because you haven't measured too much. The smaller the sample size is, the wider the bounds get in a level 3, because they say, well, actually, if you've only measured 3 times or 4 times, the reality could be, quite a bit different than what you have. And so it will push out those boundaries. And if you have only, 4 or 6 data points, those boundaries are very wide. They're wide because you don't have enough information. They're not wide because your performance was bad. They're wide because of that small sample size uncertainty. So what you can do in those cases, if you're doing a Bayesian analysis, is you can bring in a prior, which says they're like pseudo data points. It's like, I know something about this tool. The evidence in front of me is not the only thing I know. That's how you can bring in something like subject matter expertise or previous experience to say, well, that's kind of like data that I have. So instead of 6 data points, you can start to bring that up. Maybe that's the same as 12 data points or 15 data points or something like that. But just 6 by itself with no priors, you're going to have wide bounds. Is probably not usable.
So what I was targeting was 2 things. One, I remember we had this conversation offline once, and so I was curious if you'd bring that in. So you nailed that one. I think that was great. And the second thing is to kind of draw this line in the sand around what's extensive, right? So if it's not 6, then 10, right? And if it's 10, is 10 really extensive? I would say that the average operator would not assume that 10 digs is extensive because they
But
don't
you
have a
keep saying,
timeline by which to achieve the 10 digs or
you keep
how they
saying
achieve the
digs,
points.
but it doesn't have to
Features.
be 10 digs. I
Exactly,
do want to
features.
clarify that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point with this last segment was rather around the idea of a level 3 doesn't have to be thought of as this extensive validation work, right? And I think that was the message I want to bring home. And I think you've done a good job today, Jason, of saying a level 3 allows you to ask the right question. And if we could wrap it up by basically saying, and level 3 doesn't have to be considered as extensive validation. It's just doing the math.
Do you see what he's doing there? You see what he's doing? I want you to witness what happened. That's full circle. What that is that's that subconscious jealousy coming in because he's not here to control the episode. So he just projected and said, as we try to wrap it up, he's trying to send me signals to wrap up the episode even though he's not here.
Because I'm not close enough to you to grab your thigh. I'm not close enough to give you the pinch.
He can't feel the energy in the room. And he can't read it.
Apparently, I'm supposed to be grabbing your thigh right now. But.
So, on that note, audience,
okay,
I want to say thank you very much. Jason, I really enjoyed this conversation with 1162. Thanks for the work that you're doing on the statistical front in the pipeline industry. Really think it's great. Love collaborating with a fellow consultant and love seeing, again, 2 great PPIM plenary session papers. And really getting to present on both of them. So thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And, I think working together, we're trying to make the industry better.
100%.
We're trying to improve analysis. We're trying to make the industry more profitable, more efficient, all those kinds of things. So I appreciate your work as well.
All right.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us on this PPIM episode as we're on Pipeline Things with my guest co-host, Jason Skow, and my guest co-host, life partner, Christopher De Leon. We'll see you again. Thanks. This episode was executively produced by Sarah Etier. Thank you to our guest, Jason Skow of Integral Engineering. If you'd like to reference the source material, the PPIM 2026 paper, Advances in API 1163 Level 3 Validations by Jed Ludlow, Jason Skow, and Ryan Stewart is where you should look. Finally, thanks to PRCI, Rex 2026 for the use of the room and the filming of this podcast.